glasses.
Right behind you, Kate. There's paper towel.
Oh no. Oh, good aim, huh?
Okay. So we're on Genesis chapter 25. Okay. All right, so we ended chapter 24 was with the marriage of Rebekah and Isaac, and in fact the whole story of Abraham being concerned that Isaac, his son, not take a wife from the pagans of the land of Canaan, but back from his brethren who worship the Lord. And so he sent his servant, whose name we're not told, to go to his kindred back in, was it Haran they were? Or, I can't remember now where it said they were. Nahor, the city of Nahor. So back to Mesopotamia, though. So near the same area that Abraham and his family had migrated from originally, is where he still had kindred there. And so one of the interesting things to note about that I didn't mention previously was the knowledge of the true God still remained, because remember we have Noah was essentially a prophet of God, and Noah's son Seth, Shem, carried on that lineage down through Abraham. And so it's not that they had perfect knowledge of God and all of his ways, but they still knew who he was. Whereas the descendants of the other sons of Noah had gone off after Babel, their separate ways by families. And the knowledge of the true God was plainly lost. And they had the abominable practices of the various pagan tribes, which we've noted previously, the burning and offering of their own children to their idols and so forth. All these various pagan practices, which in later generations plagued Israel, continuously drawing them to the worship of these gods. Essentially you could line up the pagan gods as almost as if this is the God who seems to be established to violate these commandments, and this is the God who violates these commandments. Whether it's the murdering of their own children or turning the worship of their God into a sex cult, which was a very common practice in the pagan societies, and so forth. But the knowledge of the true God still remained in Abraham's family, and so he wanted a wife for his son from his kindred for that reason. So we have him going to his uncle, distant uncle, cousins' households. There we have our first introduction to Laban, which will come up later as when the son of Isaac, Jacob, comes into the picture. And he will actually go back to the same area in Mesopotamia when he flees from his brother Esau. Anyway, now we have the marriage of Isaac and Rebekah at the end of chapter 24, and now into 25. We've got a little bit of genealogy, which we'll skim through pretty quick. Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. So this is after the death of Sarah. And she bore him Zimran, etc., etc. So, but to the sons of the concubine, let's see, so you're having multiple generations here. So you have the sons of Keturah, the children that they birthed. Abraham, now in verse 5, gives all that he has to Isaac. So Isaac inherits everything. Abraham had concubines. Remember the multiple, in those days, multiple marriage was common. A concubine was a lesser wife, so to speak. So you have the head wife, the main wife of Abraham would have been Keturah at this point, but he also had concubines. He gave gifts to all of his children. While he was still leaving, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. He sends his children back to the land where he came from. But Isaac inherits. This is according to the promise of God. Remember, in your seed, Abraham, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. In Isaac, your seed shall be named. And remember, when we look at the book of Galatians, the seed of Abraham is a reference to Christ because it's not plural, speaking of all of Abraham's descendants, but singular. To your seed in your seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Jesus is the son of Abraham, and through which this happens. All right. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And so this phrase, gathered to his people, is a common expression in the ancient Hebrew of going to the place of the dead, the place where the souls of the blessed rest. And so you see here in the scriptures, there's a clear understanding and confession of the continuance of the soul of man. And some will try to say, well, yeah, but they didn't have an idea that there's a resurrection. And they say, well, we got the idea of the resurrection from the Babylonian captivity, and then that was carried into modern Judaism, and ultimately into the New Testament. And this is one of the reasons why, by the way, they try to redate the book of Job, even though it has the most primitive Hebrew in all the scriptures. They insist that they have to redate the book of Job into the Babylonian captivity era because it talks about the resurrection of the dead. A simpler answer is they knew about the resurrection and believed in the resurrection long before Babylon. And so the confession that he is there with his fathers. Jesus actually kind of uses this when he's arguing with the Sadducees. Remember when the Sadducees were going to try to trap Jesus, and they gave him this invented story about the man whose wife died, and he had 7 brothers, and so they had the Levirate marriage where the other brothers were obligated to take her as wife, but one after another, all of them died. And then the woman died, and they said, well, whose wife is she going to be in the resurrection? And of course, Jesus says, you guys are idiots. He literally said that. You guys are idiots. You don't know anything at all, nor do you believe the scriptures. He says, we're not like that in heaven. We don't get married in heaven. We're like the angels. He says, but the point, he gets back, he says, but as far as the resurrection goes, don't you believe what God said when he says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. For Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob live in him. And so Jesus is saying, every time we hear, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Old Testament, this is a confession of the resurrection. Okay. So he was gathered to... Yeah, go ahead.
Did the Babylonians have an idea of
Yeah,
resurrection?
Isaiah, can you go grab the coffee quick? Yeah.
Did the Babylonians have an idea of the resurrection, and possibly as the reason why the Sadducees would have?
I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. Religious ideas pop up all over societies. However, I'm not sure that the Babylonians had the concept of the actual physical body that dies is the same body that rises from the dead. More likely than not, as seems to be the theology in that part of the world, they had more the concept of reincarnation, where you're reincarnated in a different body. But you see, this is the ludicrous thing about the resurrection. And it's really an idea that you do not find in pagan societies because it just makes absolutely no sense. That the body that decays to dust is somehow going to arise and be recreated the same body even. You want to pour me a cup too and bring it here?
Got the wrong lid.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. You can pour it from that. It's fine. And of course, the whole concept of resurrection is a little bunny trail from the text that we're doing here, but we have, it's not like we have a perfect history of all these ancient peoples
Yeah.
either. But we can draw certain conclusions. And so the idea of somebody coming back into a body is as probably close as they have to resurrection. All right. But we see in Job, it was where Job has a very different idea than the pagan nations might have that believed in reincarnation, because he says, in the same body that I have right now, with my very same eyes, I shall see God. I shall see my living Redeemer. Continuing. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah. This is the cave that we saw Abraham purchase. In the same cave, ultimately, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph are all buried. Sarah is buried there. We don't hear about it after Joseph. In the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, east of Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites, there Abraham was buried with Sarah his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac his son, and Isaac settled at Beer Lahairoi, which is in the territory of Canaan still. These are the generations of Ishmael. So this is the last we hear of Ishmael. Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's servant, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, named in the order of their birth: Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael; Kedar, Abdiel, Mibsam. This guy obviously had multiple wives too. Mishram, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hadad, Tema, Jeter, Nephish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their encampments, 12 princes according to their tribes. And that was God's prophecy that he gave to Hagar, remember, that he would make Ishmael, for the sake of Abraham, also a father of many nations. He would birth 12 princes. They would found civilizations. The years of the life of Ishmael were 137 years. He breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. We have every reason to believe that Ishmael continued to believe in the true God as well. They settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt, in the direction of Assyria. He settled over against all his kinsmen. So we traditionally look at the Arab tribes as being descended from Ishmael and from the 12 princes that are spoken of here. Not that we have some rock solid genealogy. But... All right. Finally, the birth of Esau and Jacob. So these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. So Laban was his uncle. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. She had only one birth as far as we know. The children, she had twins, struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is thus, why is this happening to me? Or why am I still alive?" So not only is now she's finally pregnant, and her twin sons are fighting each other in her womb. So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger." That actually rhymes in English. Probably didn't rhyme in Hebrew. But it is in a verse form, which means that this probably was a verse that people memorized. You often will see that. All right. So, God, the Lord prophesies that Rebekah will birth two nations. We'll see who those are. When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all of his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau. Let's see, I was wondering if they had... don't say that. I was looking for the definition of his name. I do know what the name Edom means. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. And so Esau birth first is counted as the older by minutes. And so his name was called Jacob. And literally the word Jacob means he cheats. Or he takes him by the heel, he cheats. So that is, and Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. They had their favorites. So you notice that God says the older will serve the younger, and in Hebrew terms, that means the younger son, the second born, would receive the inheritance. So this is the, so he would be, the younger of the two would be the head of the family. He would inherit. And, of course, that's unusual. Usually the oldest gets the inheritance. But we see that it takes place in the course of time. And this is an interesting example because as we get to the next verses, Jacob and Rebekah cheat. They cheat. First Jacob cheats, then Rebekah cheats, which we'll get to. And so it's right there in Jacob's name. What he does here is wicked. And yet, in the end, God didn't make him do it, but he did it. And yet, God used the wicked thing that Jacob did to carry out his purpose later, that through Jacob would be Israel. The tribes of Israel would be born through Jacob, not through Esau. All right. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore his name was called Edom. He became known for this. Edom means red. The name Edom becomes important later. Jacob says, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. And then Jacob gave Esau the bread and the lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. This is what was truly going on. Jacob could see that his brother didn't care about anything, and didn't care about the inheritance that he was to receive. And he despised it so much that he threw it away just so that he could have a bowl of stew. He wasn't going to die. He was being a drama queen. All right. This, of course, begins to cause a problem. There was a famine in the land that was different than the famine that was in the days of Abraham. Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, and the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go to Egypt." So remember, Egypt generally weathered famines in those days because of the way the whole Nile watershed system worked. So when there was droughts in other places, because they had the Nile River, usually there was still food in Egypt. And so what would happen was, Egypt was the place people would go to get food, or flee to remain there. That's what happened in Abraham's day. When they had a famine in Abraham's day, they went to Egypt. Egypt, of course, is important in the history of Israel. We have when God calls Abraham back out of Egypt when the famine was over, it says, "I have called out of Egypt, I have called my son," God says. This becomes a prophecy for Christ, who would flee to Egypt, not because of a famine, but to escape the wrath of King Herod, and return, and then fulfill what God says is a prophecy. So you see these events in the Old Testament shadowing things that God would then fulfill in his son Jesus. All right, but in the case of Isaac, he says, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in a different land that I'm going to tell you about. Sojourn in that land. I will be with you and bless you there, for to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands. And I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. So now God is, we see him do this repeatedly with the patriarchs. He continuously reaffirms his promise. Yeah. Hey. Hi. Yes. He continuously reaffirms his promise. So he gives his promise to Abraham. Now he repeats his promise to Isaac. He appears to Isaac. I will multiply your offspring, again it's singular, as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Once again, the blessing is not just for Israel, but the entire world will be blessed through the offspring of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, she is my sister. Outright lie. But when he learned from his father Abraham, who did this twice, and twice it caused problems for him. Well, Isaac knows the story, so he's going to do just what his dad did. He feared to say my wife, thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out the window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. That's a euphemism. They weren't literally laughing. He saw them doing things that husbands and wives do. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, she is your wife. How then could you say she is my sister? Isaac said to him, because I thought, lest I die because of her. And Abimelech said, what is this that you have done? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and then they would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, whoever touches this man or his wife will surely be put to death. Even the pagan societies did not normally violate the sixth commandment. They knew that marriage was a sacred thing, and it was generally enshrined in all of their religions, and they would punish those who committed adultery. Unless the adultery was part of their worship. And Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him. And the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants also, so that the Philistines envied him. So here they're sheltering him from famine, and he's just becoming extremely prosperous beyond the prosperity of his hosts. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham, his father. In other words, that Isaac's getting too powerful. They filled in all his wells. Let's see how prosperous he is now. And Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us. You are much mightier than we are. And so he did. He departed from there, camped in the valley of Gerar, and settled there. So he dug more wells than his father Abraham had done, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servant dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, in other words, not all wells have great water, but he dug one that was very enviable and had good, fresh, clean spring water. Well, people he's living with don't like that. Why should he get that well? The herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, that water's ours. So he called the name of the well Esek, which means contention, because they had contended with him. And so they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also, so they called its name Sitnah, which means enmity. And he moved from there, and he dug another well, and then they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, which means broad places, or room. I've got elbow room here now. For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. And from there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him that same night and said, I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, For I am with you, and I will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. And Isaac's servants dug a well. So you see repeatedly throughout the Old Testament that altars weren't necessarily always used for sacrifice. They were often memorial stones that were set up to memorialize a particular event. And Isaac built it here because here again the Lord appeared to him and renewed his promise. When Abimelech went to him from Gerar with Ahuzah, his advisor, and Philcol, the commander of his army, Isaac said to him, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me, and you sent me away from you?" They said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you." So he said, "Let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you." In other words, it's like, yeah, we sent him away. He keeps growing stronger. Before you know it, he's going to have enough of an army to invade. And so they want to head that off at the pass. "So that you do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord." And so he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. And in the morning they rose early, and they exchanged oaths. And Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." So this finding of water in these areas is a continuous example of God's blessing, and everybody recognized it because it was unusual. He named it Sheba, which is oath, the word for oath, because this is where they took oaths. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. So this is the origin of the city of Beersheba, which we hear about in Jesus' day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. All right, so we'll stop there. But you see the beginning now of the contention between Jacob and Esau that will just grow and grow. And so you saw the name of Jacob, or Esau, is Edom. He's the father of the Edomites. They lived in the southern portion of Palestine.